Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, we are going to continue with the conflict series. We started this conflict series a few episodes back. If you look through, you'll find it. It was finding your conflict type. And of course, it'll continue. And, today we're going to do how to have a difficult conversation. And then we'll continue how do we have a difficult conversation considering our conflict type and considering the other person's conflict type. But this is the general gist of how do we have a difficult conversation. That's what we'll cover today, and it'll get you started. So if you're feeling that, maybe there's a difficult conversation that you need to be having in your life, then this will be the place to start, and you can just jump right in and get started, and we'll work out those finer details later on what your conflict type is or theirs. So I'll tell you a little bit of background. I know I mentioned it on the first conflict episode that this is my passion, talking about conflict and difficult conversations, because I experienced a significant volume of difficult conversations in my line of work as a principal, as a vice principal, as an assistant superintendent. And so I knew how badly this training was needed, and it didn't exist. I didn't have anybody helping me. And so I was thrust into this world and had to learn a lot of lessons the hard way, which I would love to prevent for a lot of people, especially if you're in leadership positions. That being said, I also recognized how much I needed to be able to have this skill in my own life, with partners, with friends, with family members, that it was a challenge, and I had grown up with the default conflict type of conflict avoidant. And so it was even more imperative for me as a leader that I learned this skill, because it wasn't something that I practiced naturally in my own life. And I always say that I'm a recovering conflict avoidant. It's your default, right? And I find myself in that position to this day where occasionally, I want to avoid conflict. And so now, at least I have the skill where I will sit down and say, hey, wait a minute, Jess, are you being conflict avoidant? So I can at least call myself out on that, and I know how to correct myself, but it is a process and it takes a while. So even if you watch this video or you listen on Spotify or Apple Music and you think, you know what, I don't know that I'm there, it'll come. As long as you take those baby steps, you start working towards it. It's a skill. You'll get better at it the more that you practice it, and the braver you are that you want to have these conversations because you want to improve your relationships, right? Like when we decide to have a difficult conversation, hopefully it is not to incite drama. That's not the goal, right? And the way that I'm trying to present it is that it is a means to improve your relationships. Sometimes, that being said, your relationships will end as a result of a difficult conversation, because now you have, learned some information that is key and it helps you to make a decision whether you want to continue with this relationship or not. But it has a very valuable purpose in that sense, where it leads us towards information that we need. And a lot of times, I'm going to say most of the time, your relationships will improve. And so I don't want you to be afraid to go into a difficult conversation, but I do recognize that that is probably the key and overwhelming barrier for a difficult conversation is the anxiety behind it, the dread. Nobody wants to have these conversations because they're uncomfortable. And I do believe that a lot of our growth in this world comes from those uncomfortable moments, those uncomfortable spaces. So if you're sitting there going, hey, maybe I need to work on this skill, great. I'm so happy you're here, because we're going to do that together. So the first step for having a difficult conversation is to ask yourself, do I really need to have a difficult conversation? And so there's 3 steps that I like to consider to decide if I need to have a conversation or not. And these are something that I learned from my therapist: love it, leave it, or change it. So love it means we're going to ask ourselves, is this something, whatever the thing is that we're considering having a difficult conversation about, because our difficult conversations always involve another person, one or more people. And so generally they're going to have some kind of a behavior, and we're going to decide, is this something that we are okay with? Is this something that we can get on board with? Are we just being a little bit neurotic in our own sense, because all of us have preferences in life, in behaviors. And sometimes what'll happen is we might decide that maybe this person just has a little bit of a weird quirk. Maybe they eat their cereal in a funny way. Maybe they, forget to put the cap on the toothpaste, something like that. And is it necessary to have a conversation about it? And that's going to be your choice. You're going to have to decide for this. Is this something that aggravates you to the point that, you just cannot imagine not addressing it? Or is it something that you're like, okay, you know what? It's just a really weird, dumb thing and I can let it go. I can just live with this. So then if you can, you love it, and that's fine. The next step, of course, is leave it. Okay, so with leave it, we're going to be asking ourselves, is this something that I can walk away from? Is this something that I can leave alone? Is this even a relationship that I don't even bother wanting to mend it? I'm just going to completely leave it. It's been so toxic. Or is it, like if you are like me and you learned that your conflict type is conflict avoidant, are you avoiding this conversation purely because of the discomfort, even though you recognize that there could be value in having it? And if you feel that, yes, I'm probably avoiding it, then we're going to continue working on how do we get there, and how do we decide, yes, we need to have this conversation. Because if you're conflict avoidant, then you'll probably already know that things often get worse and they don't always get better by avoiding conflict. So, you need to ask yourself that, can I love this thing? Should I leave it? And then, of course, the last one is change it, And so right here, I'll say that, if it's a safety issue, it automatically needs to be changed. So we need to have a discussion with that person or set up some kind of boundaries and address it. Like if it's a safety issue, 100%, you need to have that conversation and you need to express that to that person. But if it's something that you feel that I can't love it, I don't think I can leave it, and something in me is feeling like I will be unsettled if I don't address it, then you have to change it. And if you do have to change it, then you say, okay, then I need to have that difficult conversation. So that's kind of the general checklist that I go through for myself if I'm wanting to, because like I said, you don't want to have a difficult conversation every single time, because sometimes it'll just be you. And if you feel that you need to have a volume of difficult conversations, you could be surrounded by a significant amount of toxic people. Yes, that's a reality. It could happen. But then you might have to just decide, okay, you know what? This is not a good surrounding, a good situation for me. So I do need to leave this situation. But sometimes it could be you, right? Like you need to be honest with yourself. Do you have a lot of control issues? And if you really are constantly wanting to control everybody and everything around you, then you got some work to do on yourself. And you might not need to have difficult conversations every single time. Maybe you need to spend some of that time focusing on yourself. But if you have considered all of these things and you say, yes, green light, I need to have a difficult conversation, then good, here you are, and you're going to learn some steps on how to have a difficult conversation. Now, when we have a difficult conversation, there are a few things that you're going to want to consider, like the setting, the time and place. For instance, when I was a leader, it's never a good idea to have a difficult conversation first thing on a Monday morning, right? First thing in the morning, especially if that person has just come into work, because now they're going to have to work all day and they're going to have this stress on their mind. And so that's not a good idea. Also Friday afternoon, unless you think maybe this is something where where I think they'll need a little bit of buffer, some time to think about something, then you might say, okay, you know what? If we have it today, it's a good idea just because they'll need some time to process. And so you really need to consider, right? And then of course you need to consider, is this a busy time for them? Is it a busy time for you? Is there a lot going on? Then, if it's not a direct safety issue, then you can say, okay, you know what, maybe we can move this time to one where we're both a little less busy and not distracted, and we're able to really sit and focus on this. And of course, it's good often to give people an idea that you want to have a difficult conversation, right? You want to prepare them. So, you might say something like, if I generally would prefer to like request a time and not demand a time, but I would say something like, are you available anytime today or tomorrow? Because there's something I would like to talk with you about, and that can be a text, that can be an email, or even like a really quiet hallway conversation, something like that. But just to give them a heads up that they know it's coming and you're not going to ambush them, because they'll feel ambushed. And if you get somebody into a difficult conversation and they feel ambushed, they're going to be defensive. And if they're defensive, they're going to be closed. They're not going to be open. You're going to have more of a struggle in that conversation. So you want to prepare them, because maybe this is something that they're wanting too. Maybe they recognize that we have been struggling in this relationship for a while, and, we do need to address some things. And it gives them, that opportunity to say, yes, thank goodness, I wanted to have this conversation. I'm so grateful that you are willing to, take this time, because I've had things on my heart, on my mind, and I need to express them. So maybe they'll be very grateful for this conversation. So we consider the setting, we consider the timing, we've prepared the other party that we want to have a conversation. And then, of course, if you're spiritual, I definitely think it's really important that you prepare yourself. So when we're going to have a difficult conversation, I like to consider this, I call this my sandwich, right? Like my difficult conversation sandwich. And maybe it's like a self-care sandwich. So the one slice of bread is self-care, and then in the middle is a difficult conversation, and then the other slice of bread is self-care again. So what we're going to do is, with that first piece of bread, that self-care, we've already let the other party know we're going to have a difficult conversation. Now is the time that we lower our stress. We do things that are going to help to ground us. Things like, maybe if we have like a cup of tea, we're going to make sure we have a soothing music playing. We're going to maybe have a good run that morning and then do some meditation, just because we want to mentally prepare ourselves. We know this is going to be a stressful moment. We want to feel prepared. So whatever kinds of soothing routines that can help you to feel stronger before you go into it, I highly recommend that. And then, of course, if there's any kind of practices during that can help you, like I said, the tea or soothing music, affirmations that are going to help you to feel courageous and brave, and even prayer. If you want to pray before your difficult conversation, just to calm yourself and feel that you have that presence with you, supporting you. Meditations, of course, that's a big one for me. If there's a meditation that could help you. So you're going to do all of those things ahead of time, or during. And then, of course, you're going to have the difficult conversation. And at the end, we're going to work on some more self-care. And we'll talk about that later. But now that we are ready to have the difficult conversation, there is kind of a small framework that I'm going to give you. And I'm actually working on a different one for my doctoral research right now. So I'm not going to unveil that right now, but it's one that I'm very passionate about. And of course, I'm doing research on it. So I'll keep you posted. But this other framework that I have, it'll be good. It has enough steps. It'll help you to get started. And the first thing is I want you to identify a feeling, right? We're going to connect in our difficult conversation, something that's bothering us, and we want to address it. So we're going to say, I feel, and you have to name a feeling. Now, I had a friend who had a difficult conversation with her partner, and she said, I feel like you always da 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 da. And she got into an argument about this with her partner after the fact, after they kind of sorted through the issue. And he felt that she didn't name a feeling. And she said, but I did, I put the focus on myself. And in that instance, I had to agree with him. And I told her, you know what, you didn't name a feeling. You said, I feel that. And I said, and when you use the word feel in that sense, you're making a judgment. And then, of course, he got defensive. So I said, if you had stuck to a feeling, and we're talking about, I feel angry, I feel hurt, I feel sad, it has to be an actual emotion that you're listing. And if you stick to that, then, I think that'll help you. So you're going to name that feeling. I feel, and then your next part is you're going to say, you're going to express your need. Why do you feel this way? What is it that you're hoping to change? I feel lonely because I haven't spent as much time with you recently. And so you're expressing that need. I have a need for connection. I have a need for justice. I have a need for anything else that you can think of that's a need with this other party. So you're going to say, I feel so and so because, and then you're going to make a request. Okay. So those are the 3 steps. I feel because, list your need. And then your third step is the request. I feel lonely because we haven't spent as much time together in these last couple of weeks. We've been so busy. So what I would like is for us to spend time together. And maybe that's not a super difficult conversation for you, but for some people it will be, right? Like expressing any kind of need, expressing any kind of discomfort or displeasure with somebody, that's going to be hard for some people for sure. But whatever your difficult conversation is, you want to keep the focus on yourself with I statements. You don't want to be going to, you did this and you did that, because again, you're going to be creating an atmosphere where they feel defensive. And if they get defensive, then they're going to protect themselves. They're not going to be open to you and your request. So that's kind of a very general framework. I would like for you to try that one. And there are some things that we're going to keep in mind, things that could be triggering, things that could make the conversation go sideways, pitfalls, I like to call them. So there are a few things that I want you to be conscious of and recognize and try not to do these things, because it's really important that when we get into a difficult conversation with people are going to be very vulnerable. And when we enter a space of vulnerability, we want to make sure it feels safe, because we automatically don't feel safe. And if you bring in any of these pitfall behaviors, people will clam up and they go to protection mode, right? So we want to try and keep this space open. We want our energy to be open. We want to, talk to people in as kind and gentle of a way as possible, even though this may be a very hard, difficult conversation. We want to be as gentle as we can. And you want to even keep a questioning mind, right? It's very important that you have this attitude that you only know half the story and the other person maybe has the other half of the story. And we're going to be open that whatever we're going into this conversation with, we could have assumptions, that we're open to receiving whatever it is that they have to share. This is information, right? Right now, we're on a quest for information. We're sharing our side, but we're also inviting them to share their side. And that could change the tone of everything. Once you hear their side and they respond, then it could definitely shift the entire dynamic. And you could go, wow, I didn't even think of that. I wasn't aware of that. And that might change things for you. So always go into these conversations thinking, you know what, I'm going to share what I know as gently as possible, but I'm also going to be open to receiving information that I may not be aware of, right? Okay, so now we'll get into the common pitfalls. So the first pitfall could be blame, right? And so we want to avoid blaming the other person, which is like the you statements that I said. You never listen to me, and we keep it onto the I statements, like I feel unheard when I'm interrupted. But that'll be a key one. That's the first one. And then I did mention assumptions. So, when we're assuming, and of course there's the old saying, when we assume, we make an ass out of you and me. And so I don't know if I would use that term, but it's out there, it exists. And so when we're making assumptions, that's where we're jumping to conclusions. Obviously you don't care about me. That could be an assumption. And so instead of jumping to conclusions, that's where we have that questioning mind. We ask, clarifying questions. We ask, what did you mean when you said this? Why did this happen? Like it seemed like, and you can say that, right? It seemed like, or this is how I interpreted it, but I don't know what happened. Can you just share with me what happened? Another pitfall is, of course, the silence and the avoidance, right? And that's something that's very familiar to me and probably for a few of you who are listening. So we know that by saying nothing and hoping it goes away, that sometimes things get worse. And I always say, like bullying, for instance, people often advise people just ignore them, and then the bullying doesn't get worse. So that's one of those situations where I say, no, you need to be able to address this behavior, and you have to do it courageously. And so sometimes situations do get worse. We don't want to make them worse. We're trying to make them better. That's the whole point of this conversation, that we want to make things improve. We want to see some change. Hopefully this will help to elicit some of that change. So we're going to speak up respectfully, right? Instead of avoiding it, we can say something like, this bothers me. Can we talk about it? We're identifying our need, and we're, expressing it to the other party. We're saying, this is something that I think needs to change, and maybe we need to have a conversation about it. Not easy to do, but we're going to do it. Another pitfall is aggression. When we look at aggression, that's where we get in somebody's face, and we might say something like, you're so annoying, stop it. We know what aggressive behavior looks like. Somebody is coming so strong, they're getting in our face about something, and if that's us and we are inviting somebody into this space and to have a difficult conversation, and now we're getting in their face and we're getting aggressive and heated, imagine how that person is going to respond. They're going to close up, they're going to go into protection mode. You have lost any sort of credibility, any sort of, traction that you've gained will now be, ended. And so you want to be real careful with that your tone is gentle and your voice is gentle and you're calm and seated. You're not standing while they're seated, because I always say to people that you have to be aware of power dynamics too. And that can lead to somebody interpreting your behavior as aggressive. So instead, we can just be calm and use assertive language, saying something like identifying our feelings. I'm feeling frustrated. Can we try another way? Can we try another approach? And so being calm and assertive is going to help. And again, like I've said, if you, maybe prayed a little bit before that moment, maybe you have that tea in the room, that's a good way for you to take a couple breaths, have some tea, say another prayer if you need to, whatever it is. If they're aggressive or you're aggressive, we want to try and make things calm again, right? That's going to be really key to having a productive, difficult conversation. Something else that is a common pitfall is interrupting, right? And so we want to make sure that when we're in that space and we're having a difficult conversation, if we've shared our our sentiments, our thoughts, our feelings, that we're making space for the other party. Remember, there's two of you at least, or maybe three. We want to make sure that they have a protected time and space for them to identify their feelings. And they may not do it as skillfully as you. They may actually come out and use you statements. And it's going to take a lot of strength for you to look beyond that and try and identify that need that the other party is expressing. But it'll be really hard because if you start interrupting again, they're going to shut down. So we don't want to be interrupting. We want to give them the space to share what they have to share, even if, we, have to say a prayer or two because, they've touched on a sore spot with you. Maybe they've, made a judgment or something that makes you feel a little bit defensive. Of course, we can't control anybody's behavior. We can only react and respond to behaviors, but we can control our behaviors, right? And so we can make sure that we're not cutting off someone mid-sentence. We're not interjecting our thoughts onto them, that we're giving them time and space, and we're not planning as they're talking what we have to say next, because that's not active listening. Active listening is we're just cutting our thoughts and we're just focused on everything that they have to say. And that is a skill in itself, right? Listening can be a very, very challenging skill, and I recognize that. But, the more that you practice it, the better you get at it. So, if you find yourself starting to interrupt, you can apologize. You can say, go ahead. I want to hear your full point. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. And people will sense if you're being genuine, and hopefully they'll feel a little bit more disarmed and they won't want to clam up, right? We don't want people to clam up. We want them to be open and the space to be open for change. Something else, of course, is defensiveness. It's going to take a lot of skill and a lot of practice to be able to take responsibility. Sometimes we will be guilty of things that they say, and sometimes your pride can get in the way. And we want to make sure that we're taking responsibility for our shit. If it is our shit, own it and say, okay, you know what? I can see how whatever it is that they are saying that you said or did hurt them, then acknowledge that. Maybe that wasn't your intention, but they were hurt anyway. And so you want to own that. You want to make sure that they understand that you're willing to do changes too, right? That it's not just one-sided. Like, I'm going to bring this person into my difficult conversation so that they can change everything that they're doing wrong. And we forget that there's two of us in this relationship or more in this conversation. And we are playing a role in this relationship too. And so we need to be able to own it when we're not, meeting their standards too. So something that you can think about, like, I can see how my words come across. That wasn't my intention. And really just trying to understand where they're coming from. And this next one is a big one for passive aggressive people. If this is your conflict type, you will know sarcasm is not conducive or healthy in a difficult conversation. That's where you're getting really cheeky. Oh, sure, because you're always right. And any kind of snide comments. There's always a tone of anger in these jokes. And so we're going to try and remove humor from a difficult conversation. I know people always say, well, if you use humor, it can lighten the mood. And I agree with that, but I feel that there's a time and a place for humor. And in a heated moment, don't have humor. You're only going to be aggravating, right? So you may think that your sarcasm could potentially calm people down, but it won't. And sometimes I think that passive aggressive conflict types, they know this. And sometimes they're, making little jabs intentionally, right? Because, again, they're getting out some of their own aggression. And so, we want to avoid sarcasm wherever possible. Be direct, be honest with people. You can say things like, I disagree, but I understand your view. And then, of course, The last pitfall that I'll mention here today is exaggeration, right? So when you say always, never, it leaves very little wiggle room for people, and it comes out as a judgment, right? And so we want to make sure we stick to facts. And if somebody has, I don't know, maybe they were late to come and get you, 3 times in a month, and but the rest of the time they were on time. So we don't want to say you're always late. We want to say, okay, those 3 times, you really set my schedule back when you were late, etc. So you want to make sure that you're sticking to those facts. This happened 3 times. And of course, I often say that even when you're having a difficult conversation, if we can come into it with an attitude that we are willing to help with the change, that's going to make all the difference to people. So if we're going into it, let's say they were late 3 times. Help me to understand what was going on when you were late those times. Is there something I can do to help? And when people feel supported, like you're on their team, they're more likely to do changes. They're more likely to own their behaviors if they feel that you're receptive and you're willing to help out, even if it's not your job, and you're willing to, help to facilitate this change in a good way, then they'll be grateful to you. So those are the easy steps. I feel, because I, express your need, and then of course your request, and then consider those pitfalls that we listed. And now we're going to close up our difficult conversation, and we're going to have the second part of self-care. And so now we're going to go home and we're going to understand that, or maybe you are at home. I don't want to say it's only in a work setting that you'll have difficult conversations, because you could have this conversation with your partner or a family member that you live with. And so now we want to consider that second piece of self-care. What do we do to take care of ourselves now? Because your nervous system has been spiked. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and we are, making sure that we're regulating ourselves again. We're going back, and, you can do a lot of the same things that you did when you started. You can, again, have exercise that's going to help you to relieve a lot of that tension that may be built up in the middle of that conversation. You can, do prayer, have a bath, meditate, light some candles, write in a journal to just get all of the feelings out that maybe you weren't able to express in that, in that meeting. Maybe you couldn't express everything. Sometimes that'll happen, because when we have difficult conversations, we're not always our, most eloquent selves. Sometimes we can be stunned into silence based on what the other party has shared. And so, now you might be at home and you might be thinking, gosh, I should have said this, I should have said that. And you know what? It's probably a good thing you didn't, because when we have that feeling, I wish I said this, I wish I said that, that often comes from our ego. And, and it's our wanting to strike back. It's our wanting to protect ourselves. And that's not going to make a conversation better. So if you didn't say things, it's good. It's a good thing you didn't say them, but now it's coming to you, get it out, write it in a journal, call your best friend, just vent for an hour, say, I had this shitty conversation, and hopefully they're a good best friend, and they, just listen to you, get all of those feelings out, and, of course, for me, I'm always very grateful, because I always walk away from those conversations with more knowledge. And again, like I said, sometimes that means the relationship is better, because if you're able to, in that difficult conversation, you've expressed your needs, they've expressed their needs, the goal is hopefully that you make an action plan towards the change, whatever it is that you are needing to change. Hopefully you have made that action plan. So now, you're reflecting later on, and now you feel like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Maybe now you have the full picture, and now you make a decision, right? So sometimes the relationship will get better. And I've seen that happen, where the more frequent that I've had difficult conversations, the more skillfully I often handle them. And then generally what happens is things do improve. And there's there's more clarity, there's more honesty in that relationship. And people feel like, okay, we've been there, we've had that tough conversation. We can do it again if we need to. And then eventually at some point you get to a point where these aren't called difficult conversations anymore, because they don't ramp up your nervous system the way they used to, because now they just become conversations. They become open spaces where we can learn about other people and we can learn about ourselves. But like I said before, sometimes we may decide after having this conversation that this is not a relationship we want to pursue anymore. Maybe we have learned some information that at that point we're not very forgiving of, and we might recognize that I can understand that I'm not in a forgiving space. I'm very hurt by whatever was shared in this space. But that being said, that doesn't mean you can't eventually forgive this person, right? But sometimes we need to put up those boundaries, and we may need to sever the relationship even just for that period of time until you feel better. You have to protect yourself. You do to feel safe. And some people, maybe they've crossed a boundary and you don't feel emotionally safe. And so you have to honor that. You have to honor that in yourself, and you have to say, okay, you know what? At this time, I can't be in this relationship with this person, but that doesn't mean down the road, maybe things can't change, right? And hopefully the other person is doing their work. They're doing their work towards healing, and you're doing your own work too towards healing and forgiveness and grace. And then down the line, maybe you can renegotiate the terms of that relationship. But as a result of your difficult conversation, you may say, hey, at this time, this is not what I want to do. This is not a relationship I want to have. But the thing and the beauty about having that difficult conversation then is that now you can sleep peacefully. You don't have anything weighing on your heart. You don't have anything weighing on your mind. You can say, okay, you know what? I have all of the information in front of me, or most of it. Maybe you need to have a few difficult conversations with this person, but at least now you're moving towards progress. You're moving towards a space of understanding, and so that's the beauty of having a difficult conversation, that we learn more. And I really do think that a difficult conversation is a bid for connection. I really feel that way. That we have this need because we need to build a bridge with somebody. Sometimes we may have to burn a bridge with somebody, but at least we will know with full knowledge, and we'll be able to make an informed decision on what we want to do in the future. And so I hope that helps you. Of course, let me know if you have any thoughts or ideas. Like I said, this is a work in progress for me because I'm developing another framework right now for my doctoral research, and I will, of course, share that with you as soon as I can. That'll be very exciting for me, but I hope this helps you to navigate, those challenging moments in your life. And I hope it helps you to feel more empowered, like you're going in with a good idea of how you want things to be. And like I said, I had to learn all of this from scratch. There was not a soul who shared anything with me. And so I screwed up quite a few, conversations in the beginning. And you might walk away feeling like, gosh, that went sideways, and I don't feel like it went well, and that's okay. Eventually you'll get better at it. Just keep practicing and keep believing in yourself. You're trying to do good by having this conversation. You're trying to address things maybe that haven't been addressed in years, even in decades. And so, all the more power to you. That's a beautiful and amazing thing. You might be able to see all kinds of amazing changes in your life, and I hope you do. So good luck with that. I hope that this works for you, and I hope you feel supported as you navigate your difficult conversations. I know they're not fun, but they are so worth it. And, good for you for identifying that, you know what, I might need to have one right now, and just rip the Band-Aid off, get it over with, go and do it because I think, it'll help you. So thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to continue this conflict series soon with some more very specific to your conflict type or theirs. So check back, and we'll be on that learning journey together. All right, take care. Bye.